A little girl, no older than 8, stood barefoot in the pouring rain outside the most feared mansion in all of Chicago. Her dress was torn, her feet were bleeding, and she was screaming at the iron gates of a man who had buried 17 enemies in the last calendar year alone. Security guards had their guns drawn. Dogs were barking. And yet, she didn't run. She pressed her tiny face against the cold metal bars and cried 3 words that stopped the most dangerous man in the Midwest dead in his tracks. Please, save Mama. What happened next, nobody expected. The rain had been falling since 7 o'clock that Thursday evening, the kind of rain that doesn't apologize. Heavy, relentless, and cold. It turned the back roads of South Chicago into rivers of mud and swept the last warmth out of November like a punishment. Sierra Callahan was 8 years old. She had her mother's auburn hair, her late grandfather's stubborn jaw, and a heart that was, even her teachers said it, too big for her small body. She was the kind of child who cried at stray cats, who saved her lunch money to give to the homeless man outside St. Patrick's Elementary on West Adams Street, who still believed, despite everything she'd seen in her short life, that if you asked the right person for help, help would come. That belief was the only thing keeping her legs moving that night. She had run almost 2 miles through the storm, 2 miles from Crane Street, where she and her mother, Rebecca Callahan, rented the upstairs unit of a tired 3-flat building wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat. 2 miles with no shoes. She'd lost one in the mud of the back alley and kicked the other off so she could run evenly. 2 miles with a 6-inch gash on the sole of her right foot from broken glass she hadn't seen in the dark. 2 miles because she had nowhere else to go. She had tried calling 911. The phone had rung busy, impossibly, infuriatingly busy. She had pounded on the neighbor's door, old Mr. Petroff, but his lights were out, and no one answered. She had screamed into the alley until her voice cracked and her throat burned. And then she had remembered what Tommy Briggs said when he and his men came to their apartment 3 weeks ago. You think the cops protect women like your mother, little girl? The only man in this city who matters is Darwin Ricci, and even he can't help a woman who owes what your mother owes. She hadn't understood it then, but she understood something now. Tommy Briggs was afraid of Darwin Ricci. That meant Darwin Ricci was more powerful than Tommy Briggs, and right now, more powerful was what her mother needed. She had seen the Ricci estate once, on a Sunday afternoon when her mother drove her through the North Side neighborhoods for what Rebecca called the free tour. A wrought-iron fence 12 feet high, a limestone manor house set back from the road behind a manicured lawn and old oak trees, black SUVs in the driveway, men in suits standing at the gate. Don't ever go near that house, her mother had told her that Sunday. But her mother was hanging from a tree in the backyard of their building, her wrists bound above her head by a rope looped over a branch, her feet barely grazing the ground. And Tommy Briggs had told his men to leave her there overnight. To think about what she owes. Sierra had stood in the rain and looked at her mother's face, the split lip, the bruise blooming purple across her left cheekbone, the tears streaming silently down her chin, and made a decision that no 8-year-old should ever have to make. She ran. She arrived at the Ricci estate at 9:14 p.m. The 2 guards at the gate, big men in dark coats, earpieces trailing into their collars, saw her before she reached the fence. One of them, a man named Pat Doyle, who had worked security for the Ricci family for 11 years, stepped forward and held up a hand. "Hey, kid! Hey, stop!" Sierra didn't stop. She grabbed the iron bars with both hands and pressed her face between them, looking up the long driveway toward the lit windows of the house. "Please," she said. Her voice was nearly gone. "Please, my mama is on a tree. They hung her on a tree. Please help her." Pat Doyle exchanged a glance with the other guard, a younger man named Kevin Sloan. "Kid," Pat said, crouching down to her level. "Who are you? What happened?" "My name is Sierra Callahan. My mama is Rebecca Callahan, and she lives on Crane Street, and Tommy Briggs's men tied her to a tree and left her in the rain, and she can't get down, and I need someone to help her, please." Her voice broke on the last word. She wasn't crying anymore. She had gone somewhere beyond crying, to that cold, desperate place where the only thing left is forward. Kevin Sloan had already pulled out his radio. Inside the manor house, in the study on the second floor where the mahogany bookshelves ran floor to ceiling and a fire burned low in the grate, Darwin Ricci was on the phone. He was 41 years old. In photographs, the ones the Chicago Tribune occasionally ran alongside articles about organized crime and federal investigations, he looked like an architect or a corporate attorney. Dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, strong, angular features, olive skin and dark eyes that people consistently described in deposition transcripts as unreadable. He wore good suits and never raised his voice in public. He had never been convicted of anything. He had also, in the last decade, quietly become the most powerful organized crime figure in the Great Lakes region. His legitimate businesses, 3 restaurants, a construction company, a real estate investment firm called Ricci and Partners, were successful enough that the IRS found nothing worth pursuing. His illegitimate businesses were managed with the kind of precision that his underboss, Luigi Ferrante, called the discipline of a surgeon and the patience of a priest. Darwin had grown up the son of a dock worker in Bridgeport. He had watched his father work himself to ruin for wages that barely covered rent, and he had decided at age 14 that the world was organized around power, and that the only moral thing a man without power could do was acquire it. He had done exactly that. He was not, by any meaningful definition of the word, a good man. He was, however, a man who kept his word, and a man who had once had a daughter. Her name had been Lily. She had died at age 6 of a congenital heart defect on a Tuesday morning in March 9 years ago. Darwin's wife, Carmen, had followed her 18 months later. Not from illness, but from grief. The kind that doesn't announce itself, that just slowly empties a person out until there is nothing left to hold them to the world. Darwin had not remarried. He did not discuss Lily or Carmen. Their photographs were kept in a locked drawer in the desk he was sitting at right now, and on the anniversary of each of their deaths, he attended Mass at Holy Name Cathedral alone and did not speak to anyone for the rest of the day. He was mid-sentence on a phone call with his attorney, Raymond Galloway, when Kevin Sloan's voice came through the intercom on the corner of his desk. "Mr. Ricci, sorry to interrupt. We have a situation at the gate." Darwin paused. He pressed the intercom button. "What kind of situation?" "A little girl, sir. Maybe 7 or 8. She's barefoot, bleeding. Says someone tied her mother to a tree on Crane Street. She's asking for help." The line went quiet for 3 full seconds. "Says the man who did it is Tommy Briggs." Raymond Galloway, still on the phone, said, "Darwin? You still there?" "I'll call you back," Darwin said. And he hung up. He came to the gate himself. That was the thing Pat Doyle talked about for years afterward, whenever someone bought him a drink at Hannigan's Bar on Wentworth Avenue and asked him to tell the story again. Not a guard. Not Luigi. Darwin himself, coat over his shoulders, walking down the long driveway through the rain. Sierra saw him coming, and she didn't move. She stood at the gate with her hand still wrapped around the bars, watching him approach, and something in his expression, she couldn't have named it, she was 8 years old, made her think of her grandfather, who had died when she was 5, but who she remembered as someone who never lied to her. Darwin crouched in front of the gate. He looked at her face. He looked at her feet. "Tell me what happened," he said. His voice was quiet. No performance in it. So she told him. All of it. The men who came to the apartment. The argument about money she didn't understand. Her mother crying in the kitchen afterward. The way things had been getting worse for weeks. Strange cars parked outside. Phone calls her mother took in the bathroom with the door locked. The bruise on Rebecca's wrist that she said was from moving furniture. And then tonight, the sound of boots on the stairs. Her mother shouting at her. "Sierra, hide! Hide right now!" And Sierra cramming herself into the gap between the refrigerator and the wall, while 4 men she didn't know dragged her mother through the apartment. The way she'd waited until it was quiet, then crawled to the back window and looked down into the yard. "She's still there," Sierra said. "She's been there for over an hour. It's cold and she's wet and she can't get down. Please." She looked directly into Darwin Ricci's eyes. "Please help her. I don't have anyone else." Darwin Ricci said nothing for a moment. Then he stood up and turned to Pat Doyle. "Open the gate. Mr. Ricci. Open the gate, Pat." The gate swung open. Darwin crouched again, and before Sierra fully understood what was happening, he had taken off his overcoat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her entirely, dragging on the wet ground. "What's your name?" "Sierra." "Sierra, I'm going to get your mother. But I need you to stay here and let Kevin bring you inside, okay? There's a fireplace. He'll get you something warm." Sierra looked up at him with those ancient, 8-year-old eyes. "Do you promise?" A beat. "I promise," said Darwin Ricci. And this was the thing about Darwin Ricci. He never made promises he didn't keep. It was, in its own strange way, his most consistent virtue. He turned to Luigi Ferrante, who had appeared silently at his side in the way Luigi always did, seemingly materialized from nothing, calm-faced and watchful. "Get the car. Get 4 men. And get me Tommy Briggs's home address." Luigi had it memorized. He always had everything memorized. "We going to do this quiet or loud?" Luigi asked. Darwin glanced at the little girl being led inside by Kevin Sloane, her tiny shoulders wrapped in his coat, leaving bloody footprints on the limestone path. "Quiet," he said. "For now." Rebecca Callahan was 34 years old. She had grown up in Naperville, the middle daughter of a high school football coach and a dental hygienist. She had studied nursing at Loyola. She had been, by every external measure, the kind of person for whom none of this should have been possible. None of this chaos, none of this danger, none of the situation she now found herself in, wrists bound and shoulders screaming and rain falling into her open eyes as she hung from the old oak tree in the yard behind 1447 Crane Street. How does a nurse from Naperville end up here? It had started, as so many disasters do, with love. 4 years ago, Rebecca had been dating a man named Dennis Hale. Dennis was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, dangerously, in ways that made you feel chosen rather than trapped. He was also, as Rebecca had not known when she met him, involved in financial schemes at the outer edges of Tommy Briggs's operation. Not deeply. Dennis was too cowardly for deep involvement, but enough to have borrowed $80,000 from Briggs's lending arm under terms that were, to put it generously, criminal. Dennis and Rebecca had broken up 18 months into the relationship, when Sierra was 6. Dennis had been decent enough about it on the surface. He had not been decent about the debt. He had listed Rebecca's name on the loan paperwork without her knowledge. Her name, her address, her social security number, all of it. And when he disappeared from Chicago entirely, relocating to Portland with a new girlfriend and a new identity, the debt had transferred to Rebecca by default. She had spent 2 years fighting it. She had hired a lawyer, a real one, Frederick Bloom of Bloom and Associates on LaSalle Street, who specialized in financial fraud. Frederick had confirmed what she suspected. The paperwork was fraudulent, her signature forged, and under any legitimate legal standard, she owed Tommy Briggs nothing. But Tommy Briggs did not operate under legitimate legal standards. He had sent men to her apartment 3 times. He had left a dead crow on her doorstep. He had called her at work until her supervisor told her she needed to sort out whatever personal situation she was dealing with. And 6 days ago, he had given her a deadline. Pay $80,000 by November 15th, or face the consequences. Tonight was November 15th. Rebecca had known they were coming. She had spent the day making plans she hoped she would never need, arranging for her neighbor, Margaret Fielding, to take Sierra if anything happened, leaving a sealed envelope with Frederick Bloom containing a full account of everything. She had not planned well enough. Margaret Fielding hadn't been home, and now her daughter was out there, somewhere in the rain, and Rebecca could not get down from this tree, and the cold was doing something to her extremities that she knew, clinically, was dangerous. She heard the car before she saw the headlights. 2 vehicles pulled into the alley behind the building, moving without urgency. 4 men got out of the first, 3 from the second, and then a figure from the passenger seat of the lead car. Tall, dark coat, moving with the particular, unhurried quality of someone who has never needed to rush because nothing has ever failed to wait for them. She had seen Darwin Ricci's photograph in the newspaper. She recognized him. Her stomach performed a complicated maneuver. One of the men had bolt cutters. The rope was cut in approximately 4 seconds. 2 others caught her before she hit the ground. She would have fallen. Her arms had gone entirely numb above the elbow, but they held her with practiced, impersonal efficiency and lowered her to the wet grass. Darwin Ricci stood over her and looked at her face for a moment. "Rebecca Callahan?" he said. "Yes," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "Your daughter came to find me." Rebecca closed her eyes. Something between relief and terror moved through her, the specific combination of emotions that comes with being saved by someone who frightens you as much as what you were saved from. "Sierra, she's safe. She's at my house. She's fine." He paused. "Can you walk?" "I don't know yet." He extended his hand. She stared at it for a moment, then took it. He pulled her to her feet with minimal effort and kept hold of her arm as she tested her weight on both legs. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Darwin Ricci said. "We need to talk." The Ricci estate at night was a different world. Rebecca sat in the kitchen, a kitchen that was absurdly beautiful, with white marble countertops and copper pots hanging from a ceiling rack, and the smell of something like rosemary and good olive oil lingering in the air, with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching her daughter sleep on the leather couch in the adjacent sitting room. Sierra had fallen asleep, still wearing Darwin Ricci's oversized coat. The fire was warm and her color was good, and her foot had been cleaned and bandaged by a man named Dr. Anthony Caruso, who had arrived within 20 minutes of a phone call and had not asked a single question about the circumstances. Rebecca's wrists were wrapped in gauze. Her face had been cleaned. Her ribs hurt where she'd been shoved against the wall. 2 might be cracked, Caruso had said, though he couldn't be certain without imaging. She felt like she had fallen into a story that belonged to someone else. Darwin sat across from her at the kitchen table. Luigi Ferrante stood near the door. tablet in hand, quiet as furniture. There was coffee in front of Darwin that he hadn't touched. "Tell me about the debt," he said. So she told him. All of it, from Dennis Hale to Frederick Bloom to tonight. She kept her voice steady because she had long since used up her available panic and was operating on the calm that comes after. She watched his face while she talked. It revealed nothing. He listened the way people with genuine power listen, completely, without interruption, without the performance of sympathy. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I know Tommy Briggs," he said finally. "I assumed. He operates in territory that borders mine. He's been useful in the past. He's also been," a pause, a careful selection of words, "increasingly problematic." Rebecca looked at him steadily. "Is that what I am? Useful?" Something shifted in his expression, almost imperceptibly. "No," he said. "You're a woman who didn't deserve what happened to you tonight. And your daughter walked 2 miles in the rain to ask me to fix it." Another pause. "I don't turn away from that." Why not? The question hung in the air. It was too personal, she knew. Too direct. But she was a nurse. She dealt in directness. Darwin Ricci looked at his coffee cup. "I had a daughter," he said. "She died a long time ago." The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. This one had weight. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, and she meant it. He nodded once. Then he said, "The debt is not legitimate. I've already had one of my people pull the original loan documentation. Your signature was forged. We can see it clearly when you compare it to known samples. Dennis Hale set you up as collateral on a debt he never intended to pay." My lawyer told me the same thing. Your lawyer is right. But Briggs doesn't care about legal standards. He cares about the money and the example. Darwin leaned forward slightly. "I can make the problem go away, but I need you to understand what that means." "What does it mean?" "It means Briggs will know I intervened, and it means you will have an obligation. Not a financial one," he added quickly, reading her expression. "But when Darwin Ricci does something for you, people know it. It changes how you move through certain spaces in this city." Rebecca absorbed this. "You're telling me that if you help me, I become associated with you." "Yes." "And is that better or worse than what I have now? Tonight?" He almost smiled. "It's better." Rebecca looked across at Sierra's sleeping form. Her daughter's hand was curled under her cheek. Even asleep, she looked stubborn. Rebecca's heart did something painful and tender and fierce all at once. "Okay," she said, "whatever it means. Help us." That night, Rebecca and Sierra slept in 2 of the guest rooms of the Ricci estate. Rebecca hadn't planned to, had fully intended to insist on going home, back to Crane Street, back to the life she'd built on her own. But Dr. Caruso had said firmly that she shouldn't be alone in case of complications from the rib injury, and Sierra had still been deeply asleep, and she hadn't had the will to interrupt either of those facts. In the morning she woke to sunlight through heavy curtains, and the smell of coffee, and the distant sound of Sierra's voice, animated and cheerful from somewhere below. She found them in the kitchen. Sierra was sitting at the marble island with a bowl of cereal, talking, actually talking, with the guileless volubility of a child who has decided someone is safe, to Darwin Ricci, who was standing on the other side of the counter with a coffee cup, still in a dress shirt and dark trousers, listening to her with an expression of what appeared to be genuine attention. "And my teacher, Mrs. Gallagher, says I'm very good at reading, but I think math is more useful, because you can use it in real life." "Do you use math?" Sierra was saying. "Every day," Darwin said. "See, that's what I said. Mrs. Gallagher says reading is—" Sierra looked up and saw her mother in the doorway. "Mama!" She slid off the stool and crossed the kitchen at speed, and Rebecca caught her and held her with all 4 limbs and pressed her face into her daughter's hair and breathed her in, alive, safe, warm, smelling of the same strawberry shampoo she always smelled of, and didn't try to hide the tears. "I got help," Sierra told her mother's shoulder, "just like you always said. I asked the right person, and it worked." Rebecca looked up at Darwin Ricci over her daughter's head. He was looking at the counter. Tommy Briggs found out on a Friday morning. He found out because one of his men, the one named Gerald Watts, who had actually tied the rope at 1447 Crane Street, came to his office in the back of a tire shop on South Pulaski and told him that someone had cut Rebecca Callahan down from that tree, and that the 2 vehicles he'd identified from CCTV footage in the alley were registered to an LLC called Ferrante Group, which anyone with half a brain in Chicago knew was Darwin Ricci's name on a piece of paper. Tommy Briggs was 52 years old and had been operating criminal enterprises in South and Southwest Chicago for 20 years. He was not a man who frightened easily. He was, however, a man with enough experience to recognize the difference between a problem and a catastrophe. He sat with his 2 senior lieutenants, a man named Bobby Crane and another named Paul Sheridan, and chewed over the situation for an uncomfortable hour. "Maybe it's nothing," Bobby said. "Maybe he just did a favor, a one-time thing." "Ricci doesn't do one-time things," Tommy said. "So what do we do?" Tommy looked at the wall. There was a map of Chicago there, the kind that had colored pins in it for territories and operations. He had worked very hard over 20 years to expand the territory those pins represented. He was not going to lose a square inch of it over a nurse from Naperville. "I want to know who the woman is," Tommy said. "I want to know her full history. Why is Ricci interested in some nobody with an $80,000 debt?" "You want me to send someone to talk to her?" Paul asked. "No." Tommy shook his head. "I want you to find me something on Darwin Ricci, something I can use. Because if he's made this woman his business, I need leverage." This decision was, as decisions go, one of the worst Tommy Briggs ever made. What Tommy Briggs did not know, what almost no one outside the Ricci organization knew, was that Rebecca Callahan was not a random woman whose daughter had wandered to the right gate on the wrong night. Or rather, she was that. But she was also something else. 3 years earlier, Rebecca Callahan, working the overnight shift at St. Anthony Hospital on West 19th Street, had treated a man who had been brought in with 2 gunshot wounds, no ID, and strict instructions from the men who brought him that no one was to ask questions or make reports. She had treated him because treating people was what she did. She had kept quiet about the circumstances because she was tired and frightened, and the men in the waiting room had not looked like men who responded well to questions. The man's name, though she hadn't known it then, was Nico Ferrante, Luigi's younger brother. Nico had survived. He had walked out of St. Anthony's 3 days later with clean stitches and a new lease on life, and he had told his brother, and Luigi had filed it away in the meticulous mental ledger he kept of people who had done the Ricci family a service. Rebecca didn't know this. Darwin had known it when Kevin Sloane's voice came through the intercom and said the name Callahan. He'd known it before he walked down the driveway. He had done the math in under a second. He had still been surprised by the girl at the gate. He had been even more surprised to realize, over the course of that first strange morning with coffee and sunlight and the sound of a child talking about math, that he wanted to keep being surprised by her. This realization was not comfortable. He had spent 9 years becoming comfortable with the absence of it, The threat came on a Wednesday, 9 days after Sierra had run to the gate. Rebecca had not moved back to Crane Street. This had been Darwin's suggestion, framed as practical, about security, about the ongoing situation with Briggs. But she had seen it for what it also was, and she had not argued because she was not stupid and because the alternative was the apartment on Crane Street with its broken window lock and its single chain on the front door. Sierra had missed 3 days of school. She was now attending, at Darwin's arrangement, with a discreetness that Rebecca found both impressive and slightly unsettling, via a private tutor, a woman named Patricia Enfield, who came to the estate each morning and was, apparently, the best elementary educator on the North Shore, and also discreet enough to not ask questions about why she was teaching a child in a Mafia estate. Rebecca had gone back to work at St. Anthony's. One of Darwin's people drove her and picked her up. She had told exactly no one at work anything about any of this, which was easier than it should have been, possibly because she was still processing it herself. The threat came through Frederick Bloom. Frederick Bloom called her on a Wednesday morning between her second and third patients and told her, in a voice that was carefully controlled and only shaking a little, that he had received a package at his office. Inside was a photograph of his 12-year-old son leaving school and a typed note that said, "Tell your client to step away from Ricci. The debt stands. 30 days to pay, or we start having conversations with the boy." Rebecca sat in the break room of St. Anthony's and stared at the wall for 90 seconds. Then she called Darwin. He answered on the second ring. "Briggs just threatened my lawyer's son," she said, 12 years old, to get to me. A pause. When Darwin spoke again, his voice had changed in a way she was starting to recognize. Quieter, more precise. The voice he used when something had crossed from business into consequence. "Where are you?" "Work." "Stay there. I'll have someone with Bloom and his son within the hour." "Darwin." She stopped. "He's not going to stop, is he? This is only going to escalate." "Yes," he said, because he didn't lie to her. She had noticed this from the beginning. He didn't soften things or redirect or perform optimism. He told her the truth, even when the truth was hard. But he's made a mistake. What mistake? He moved against a civilian, a lawyer's child. That crosses a line that even the people who work with Briggs will not be comfortable with. A pause. "I've been waiting for him to do it." Rebecca absorbed this. "You knew he would." "I thought he might. And you used me to draw him out." Another pause, longer this time. "That's not—" He stopped, started again. "I intervened because Sierra came to that gate and asked me to. What came after was genuine. But yes, I recognized that Briggs would react to my involvement, and I calculated that his reaction would expose him." He waited. "I'm telling you this because you asked me directly, and I will not lie to you." Rebecca sat with this for a moment. It should have made her angry. Part of her was angry, but part of her was something else, something that recognized, in the precision of his honesty, a kind of respect that she hadn't received from many men. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I mean, I'm not happy about it. We're going to have to talk about it properly. But right now, Frederick Bloom's son needs protection. So, okay, deal with Briggs." She heard something that might, in another man, have been a breath of relief. "I'll deal with Briggs," he said. But here was the twist. Here was the thing that none of them, not Darwin, not Luigi, not the network of informants and contacts and favored city officials that made the Ricci operation function, had seen coming. Tommy Briggs was not acting alone. The investigators who pieced it together afterward, and there were investigators eventually, though the official record of what happened would remain, as these things tend to, deliberately incomplete, determined that Tommy Briggs had entered into an arrangement approximately 8 months earlier with a man named Victor Strand. Victor Strand was not a Chicago figure. He was from New York, specifically from a network of financial crime operations that extended from Wall Street through several layers of shell companies into international territory that the FBI's Organized Crime Division had been trying to map for 3 years. Strand's interest in Chicago was territorial. He wanted the Great Lakes distribution routes that Darwin Ricci controlled, and he had identified Tommy Briggs as the wedge. The plan had been elegant, in a cold way. Strand would finance Briggs's challenge to Ricci, give him the resources, the manpower, the connections, and in return, when Ricci was destabilized or eliminated, Briggs would hand over the distribution routes, a hostile acquisition dressed up as a territory dispute. What neither Briggs nor Strand had anticipated was an 8-year-old girl with bloody feet and a ferocious belief in asking the right person for help. Rebecca Callahan's arrival in Darwin Ricci's household, and specifically, Darwin Ricci's very visible and very deliberate decision to claim her situation as his own, had accelerated Strand's timeline. He had pushed Briggs to move faster, to apply pressure, to force a confrontation before Ricci could consolidate whatever he was building. This was the mistake, because Darwin had a contact in the FBI. Not a corrupt one, something stranger than that. Special Agent Rosalind Marsh, who ran the Organized Crime Task Force out of the Chicago field office, had been building a case against Victor Strand for 22 months. She needed a thread she couldn't find. She had known, in the loose, unspoken way, that these things are known between people who operate in the same complex world from different sides, that Darwin Ricci sometimes had information that she could use. She had never had a reason to call him that he might actually respond to. She had one now. Luigi Ferrante made the connection. He always made the connections. He called Agent Marsh on a Thursday and said, "We're hearing noise about a man named Victor Strand. We think he's backing Briggs. We think the play is the distribution routes. We don't know his structure." Marsh said, "We know his structure. We've known it for 2 years. What we need is a domestic link, something that puts Strand in direct operational contact with a US-based criminal enterprise." Luigi said, "Tommy Briggs has a man named Gerald Watts. Watts was present at an assault on a woman named Rebecca Callahan on November 15th. We have footage. We also believe Watts has been the primary liaison between Briggs and Strand's people." Marsh said, "If you give me Watts, I can give you a grand jury subpoena for Strand within 60 days. Luigi said, "We'll have Watts to you by Monday." He paused. "He'll be in good health," Luigi added, because this was also something the Ricci organization maintained, in its strange, disciplined way. They did not hand over corpses to the FBI. It created problems. Gerald Watts was delivered, via his own front door, and an anonymous tip to the Bureau's public line on a Sunday evening. He had a very difficult 48 hours in a federal interview room on West Roosevelt Road, and by Tuesday morning, he had given federal investigators everything they needed. Tommy Briggs was arrested on racketeering, extortion, and assault charges the following Friday. Victor Strand was indicted in New York 43 days later. The $80,000 debt to Rebecca Callahan was, in the legal chaos that followed, rendered entirely void. 3 months later, the kitchen of the Ricci estate had become a familiar place to Rebecca Callahan in ways she was still, every morning, slightly surprised by. She knew where the good coffee was kept: second shelf, left cabinet, the Italian brand that arrived in a brown paper bag every Friday. She knew that the kitchen was Darwin's favorite room in the house. the only room where he seemed to fully exist rather than strategically occupy. She knew that he made his own breakfast at 6 in the morning, and that he read the Tribune in print, not on a phone, and that he listened to opera on a small speaker on the counter in a way that he would have denied if asked. Sierra had, 3 weeks ago, started calling him Darwin. Just Darwin, with the particular directness of children who have decided someone belongs in their world. He had not corrected her. Rebecca had watched this happen with a complicated mixture of emotions she was still sorting through. Fear was one of them, the rational, well-founded kind, the kind that comes from understanding clearly what a man does and who he is, and what living in his orbit means. But there was something else in the mixture too, something warmer and less rational, something she had tried, several times, to talk herself out of, and had not entirely succeeded. It was a Sunday morning in February when they finally had the real conversation. Sierra was with Patricia Enfield in the library. They had, with great enthusiasm, begun working through a children's book about the solar system, and Sierra's delight in it had been loud enough to carry through the house. The sound of her daughter's laughter, contained and safe and warm, was something Rebecca had come to treat as a kind of compass. As long as she could hear it, something in the world was right. She and Darwin were in the kitchen. She was making tea. He was reading the paper. It was one of those mornings that have the quality of something practiced, something settled, something that has found its own rhythm. "I need to tell you something," Rebecca said. He lowered the paper. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said. "Which is, I know that might sound backward, but it matters to me to say it." He watched her. "I know what you are," she continued. "I'm not pretending otherwise. I'm a nurse. I deal in the world as it actually is, not as I want it to be. And the world as it actually is contains you, exactly as you are." She paused. "But I also see..." She stopped, tried again. "You're not what you appear, or you're not only what you appear, and I've been trying to decide whether that matters." "Does it?" he said. "Yes," she said, "but not in the way I expected." The silence was of a piece with the morning, unhurried, without pressure. "I had a wife," Darwin said. "Carmen. She knew what I was when she married me. She made the calculation and chose me anyway." He paused. "She was extraordinary, and I think she might have saved my life in more ways than I understood at the time." "What happened to her?" "We lost our daughter. It broke something in her that couldn't be fixed." His voice was even. He had made peace with facts the way you make peace with the weather, not by liking them, but by accepting that they do not respond to argument. "I decided, after that I would not put another person through the specific particular pain of loving me." Rebecca held her tea with both hands. "That seems," she said, "like the kind of decision other people deserve input on." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I suppose it does." She did not move permanently into the estate. She was very clear about this. She went back to Crane Street. She fixed the window lock. She went back to work at St. Anthony's. She had lunch with Frederick Bloom, who was, with the cheerfulness of a man whose worst fear has been averted, entirely recovered and rather delighted by the whole saga in a way he would never admit publicly. She enrolled Sierra back at St. Patrick's Elementary, where Mrs. Gallagher received her back with minimal fuss and maximum practical efficiency. She built her life back on its own foundation. But she had dinner at the estate on Thursdays. This was a fact. It had started as a practical thing, a check-in, a courtesy, and had become something else without either of them announcing it. Darwin cooked on Thursday evenings. He was, improbably and very specifically, a good cook of simple things: pasta, roasted chicken, vegetables in olive oil and salt. He had learned from his mother. He cooked in the way he did most things, with concentration, without fuss. Sierra always asked for extra of whatever it was. Father Michael Donoghue, the priest at Holy Name Cathedral who had known Darwin Ricci for 15 years, and who was one of the very few people who spoke to him with complete candour, saw Darwin at Mass on a Sunday in March, and said to him afterward, in the quiet alcove beside the baptismal font, "You look different." "Different how?" Darwin said. Father Michael considered. He was 71 years old and had been a priest in Chicago for 43 years, and had seen a great deal. "Like you're letting yourself want something again," he said. "I didn't think I'd see it." Darwin said nothing. "Is it the woman?" Father Michael asked. "I'm not discussing this with you," Darwin said. Father Michael smiled. "No," he said. "You don't have to." He put a hand briefly on Darwin's arm. "Just don't talk yourself out of it, Darwin. That would be the waste, not the risk." The evening in April, a warm one, the first genuinely warm evening of the year, with the windows of the estate's kitchen open and the smell of grass coming in, Darwin put a glass of wine in front of Rebecca and said, "I want to show you something." He led her through the house, which she had come to know well enough, up the main staircase, and down the hall, past the rooms she recognized, to a door she had always noticed but never opened. He unlocked it. Inside was a small room, simply furnished, a child's bookshelf, a wooden chest, a window seat with cushions. On the wall, a photograph, a little girl, perhaps 5 or 6, with Darwin's dark eyes and a wide, ungovernable smile, holding a stuffed rabbit and squinting into the sun. Rebecca said nothing. She just stood and looked. "Her name was Lily," Darwin said. "I know," Rebecca said softly. "You told me." "I've never shown anyone this room." He was standing in the doorway. Even now, he did not come fully in. It was, she understood, still a space he needed to enter carefully. "I thought, I wanted you to know who I was, before all of it." Rebecca turned and looked at him, at the man he was and the man he had been, and the space between those two things that grief had built. She would have liked Sierra, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes, I think so." Rebecca crossed the small room and stood in front of him. She was a woman who had made decisions under pressure, who had assessed emergencies and kept her hand steady and functioned when fear told her not to. She was also a woman who had spent too many years making herself smaller around men who didn't deserve her whole size. She was not going to do that now. "I am not Carmen," she said. "I want you to know that. I know what happened to her, and I know what it did to you, and I am not going to pretend that isn't real. But I am also not going to let it be the reason we don't figure out what this is." She paused. "I want to figure out what this is, if you do." Darwin Ricci, who had negotiated with federal agents and rival crime organizations and prosecutors and men who had put guns to his head in parking garages, looked at her and said nothing for what felt like a very long time. "I'm not easy to know," he said finally. It was the most honest thing he could offer. "I noticed," Rebecca said. "My life is... I know what your life is." She looked at him steadily. "I'm a nurse, Darwin. I have been present at births and deaths and the worst moments of complete strangers' lives, and I have managed to remain a reasonable human being through all of it. I think I can manage you." Something happened in his expression. It was not quite a smile, and it was not quite the measured, closed thing he usually wore. It was something between those, and more itself than either. "You think so?" he said. "I do," said Rebecca Callahan. She was, as she generally was, correct. 6 months later, Sierra Callahan, who had an unerring nose for the truth of things as children do, climbed into the passenger seat of Darwin Ricci's car after he picked her up from school. Thursdays, which had grown to include school pickup without anyone formally deciding it, and said, "Are you going to marry my mum?" Darwin looked at the road. "That's a large question," he said. "I know." Sierra buckled her seatbelt with authority. "I'm just asking because if you are, I'd like you to get a dog first. I've always wanted a dog, and Mama always says, 'We can't because the apartment is too small, but you have a big yard.'" She looked at him with perfect seriousness. "I think that's a good plan. Dog first, then wedding." Darwin Ricci, who had not laughed, with genuine lightness, in longer than he could easily remember, laughed. "I'll take it under consideration," he said. "Great," said Sierra. She pulled out a library book, something about the solar system, and settled in to read for the drive, as if the matter were entirely resolved, as if the rest of it, the wedding, the dog, the complicated geometry of 3 lives finding their shape together, were simply a question of logistics, and logistics were easy if you just applied yourself. She was not wrong. There is a version of this story, the version that the newspapers told, in their partial way, when Tommy Briggs was sentenced to 14 years, and Victor Strand's indictment made the national news. That does not include Sierra Callahan at all. In that version, it is a story about organized crime and federal investigations and the complicated ecosystem of power in a major American city. It is a story about strategy and leverage and the long game. But the true version, the version that matters, begins with a little girl who ran 2 miles through the rain with no shoes because she believed that if you asked the right person for help, help would come. She was not naive. She was not lucky. She was, at 8 years old, possessed of a clarity of purpose that most adults spend their entire lives trying to recover. She looked at a world that had taken her mother and tied her to a tree in a rainstorm, and she chose not to surrender to it. She chose instead to run toward the most powerful thing she could find and ask it, simply and directly, to be good. And it was. That's the thing about Sierra Callahan. She didn't just save her mother that night. She didn't just unlock something in Darwin Ricci that had been locked for 9 years. She did something subtler and more consequential than either of those things. She reminded a very powerful, very guarded, very tired man that goodness was still a request worth responding to. Father Michael Donoghue told the story at the wedding, a small affair in the garden of the estate, on a June afternoon, with the old oak trees casting long shadows across the grass. He was the only person present who could tell it properly, and he did, with the precision of a man who understands that the best stories are the ones that turn on the smallest things. "A little girl at a gate," he said, in the rain, with bloody feet and a ferocious heart. That's where it started. That's where all of it started. In the front row, between Rebecca in a simple cream dress and Darwin in the closest thing to a relaxed expression he was likely to ever wear in the public, Sierra Callahan sat with her feet dangling off the chair and a small brown dog, a 4-month-old terrier mix named Newton, asleep in her lap. She was 9 now. She had, if anything, grown more certain of herself in the past year. More settled. The shadow that had lived behind her eyes, the shadow of a child who knows that her world is not entirely safe, had not gone entirely, because shadows like that don't entirely go. But it had lightened, the way shadows do when enough light comes in from enough directions. She looked up at Father Michael as he told the story. She knew it already, of course. It was her story. She had been there. But she listened anyway, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has seen the end of a long chapter and knows it ended well. And the dog, Father Michael added, glancing at Newton, came first, as requested. And that, right there, is the story of Sierra Callahan, an 8-year-old girl who refused to accept that her world had no heroes left in it. She ran barefoot through a Chicago rainstorm and knocked on the door of the most feared man in the city, and she asked him, simply and without apology, to be good. And he was. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money or leverage or an army of men in dark suits. Sometimes it's a little girl at an iron gate, pressing her face through the bars and saying, "Please, if this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, then do something real in return. Hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we tell stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss what comes next."